Hello, everyone, and welcome to the UnX News Radio podcast, your news source for all things unexplained. And now, here's your host for the UnX News podcast, Margie Kay.
Good evening, everyone. This is UnX News Radio, and we are live now, streaming on YouTube and on Facebook, and in the near future on some other platforms as well. Want to welcome you to the program this evening. We have a great show for you tonight. I do want to discuss one thing before we get started, and that is the recent or upcoming information that's being released by the Pentagon that, of course, everyone is talking about. And in the UFO community, a lot of us feel like there's not really going to be a whole lot of information. I'm hoping there is. I really do. All of us do. But we kind of feel like the government has been so secretive for so long that why would they give us every bit of information that they have now? So that's probably not going to happen. But the one good thing that has happened because of this event is that the media has now taken the subject of UFOs very seriously. And they're treating it differently. They are speaking to all of the investigators, those of us who have been in contact with the media, in a complete different manner. And it is great to see happen, because that in turn is probably going a long way towards changing the public's attitude about UFOs and UAPs. Now, I did an interview with several media outlets. I couldn't believe how many were interested in it. And it's all because of this information coming out. They did, at the Kansas City Star is the one who started it. They did an excellent interview with me for over 5 hours. They did a video, they're showing video on their site, as well as a written interview, an article. So I encourage you to take a look at that. But the main thing is that there's a whole shift in attitude. And I'm going to talk to my guest about that tonight. So let's get going here with my very special guest this evening, Cheryl Costa. Cheryl is a two-service military veteran, a retired aerospace security engineer, and she has had a lifelong interest in UFOs. From 1998 to 2001, she hosted the X Factor talk radio program in Washington, D.C., uncovering UFOs and many other paranormal topics. From 2013 through June 2018, she wrote the wildly popular weekly newspaper blog, New York Skies, for the Syracuse NewTimes.com. In 2017, Cheryl and her spouse, Linda Miller Costa, published the UFO Sightings Desk Reference, United States of America, 2001 to 2015. It is the first ever published statistical analysis of UFO sightings all over the United States. In May of 2021, they published the UFO Sightings Desk Reference, United States of America, 2001 to 2021. This edition has even more analysis of UFO sighting patterns than the 2017 book. Cheryl was the 2018 Researcher of the Year. And I want to welcome Cheryl to the program today. Thank you so much.
Hi, Marge.
Thanks for taking the time. It sounds like you are a very busy person. And I must say that the content in this book is incredible. It is an extremely invaluable resource to any UFO researcher. And when I got it as a UFO researcher, I was just amazed at what was in here. And I must say, I've never seen anything like it. I don't think anyone else has ever done anything like this, have they?
No. In fact, when we did the 2017 book, a couple of people made a point that there hadn't been anything like it. Point one, Linda is a career research librarian. She did a search on UFOs and statistical UFO studies, anything like that.
Mhm.
And the closest thing she came to was some little thing that the Project Blue Book had done. So since Project Blue Book 50 years ago ended in 68, nothing. And they only had 12,000 sightings. We've got 167,632.
Yes, and I think because nothing has been published, a lot of the public somehow believe that, oh, the UFO sightings happened in the 40s and 50s, and there hasn't really been anything since.
Yep.
And do you get that as well?
All the time. I was at MegaCon last year.
Mhm.
And one of the guests we had there was the producer for the television program Project Blue Book. Okay.
Yeah.
And his people, he was up there being interviewed by George Knapp, and he made a comment about the fact that his writers all thought this was something that happened in the 40s and 50s. And I left the conference hall for about 5 minutes, went up to my room, brought down, I only had 2 copies of the white book with me. And I brought it down, and I met him backstage after he'd come off stage, and I gave it to him. And he started flipping through the things. His eyes got really big. And he says, "This is what's going on now." And I said, "Yeah, that's 15 years. And he's like, "I got to show this to my writers, you know?" So, there's a lot of people seem to think that this is the golden age of UFOs was in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And to be honest with you, if you saw the briefing document there was between 1960 to 2000, the numbers were a tenth of what they are since 2001 to now.
Yes, there does seem to be a huge increase as of late. We've had several flaps in this area in the state of Missouri where I am, where it's just incredible the number of sightings that come in, and then it'll go back down. There won't be any for a while. And right now we're in a surge. For probably most of this year up until right now, there were very few sightings, although some of them were pretty darn good, close encounters, things like that. But now they're suddenly picking up again. I always like to ask anybody I have come on the program who has done anything like this or has been involved in ufology, how in the world did you get interested in the subject to start with?
Okay. The short answer, in 1965, I was about 12. It was a late August afternoon, about 3 weeks before school started again. And we were coming down off of a hill up in a rural area where my uncle had a farm. And we were coming down off the hill, and my mother had my father stop. Now, it had been a wet year, so the corn was higher than the car, that kind of thing. It was that kind of thing. We looked out. She pointed out into the western sky, clear blue sky, and parked out there like a rock with this silver ball. And give you an idea how big it was. If you hold your arm out and look at your little fingernail, that's how big it was. And she said, well, NASA at that point was only about 5 years old, and he said, well, maybe it's something NASA's doing. Maybe it's the Air Force. Maybe it's a weather balloon. And then she looked at me and says, it might be people from another world.
Oh, wow.
Well, that got the 12-year-old going. And we got back on the road, got down the bottom of the hill. My father turned left to go back to our hometown, and I crawled up in the back window of that big old Chevy Impala. It had one of those really big back windows. And I crawled there, and who are you guys? Who are you guys? When it decided to leave, I didn't see an effect like that again till like the early 90s with one of the Star Trek movies.
Mm-hmm.
And that a thing like that changes you. And after that, Mom and I got books at the library. We do little book reports with each other. And in fact, when Von Daniken's book came out, Chariots of the Gods, there in the late 60s, we had a copy. We had a paperback copy. She dog-eared on the top. I dog-eared on the bottom of the pages. And, for Mother mother-child relationship. Mom and dad are stupid when you're a teenager, and
Right.
this was one thing that kind of drew us together. Now we disagree on a lot of stuff in life right now, and we have for the last 30 years, but it's the one thing we can both get on the phone and have a civil conversation about right now. And that's pretty amazing. After that, it was just a matter of, I was always interested in the topic, but when I got into the Air Force in 1970, I had a clearance. They didn't want you joining things like MUFON, things like this, So I literally dealt with Air Force years, Navy, many, many years in the Navy, and then 32 years in Lockheed Martin Aerospace. So again, I was always under the stricture of a clearance. I was well read on the topic matter, but couldn't say anything about it. And then when I got out from underneath that, when I retired in 2011, I finished up a bachelor's degree in entertainment writing, and I started working for a newspaper. And that's when I started being able to do a column. I pitched the idea of a column about UFOs, saying these will be popular. I guarantee it. And they everybody laughed me out of the office from, I don't know, half a dozen papers, something like that. And then finally a weekly paper up here took a chance on me. The editor-in-chief was, what I'm going to say, sympathetic to the topic matter. He had read a lot of the same books I had. So he said, I'll try you out for a month. And he sort of had this tone of from like the Princess Bride, the dread pirate Roberts, I'll most likely kill you in the morning kind of thing. And he says, I'll try you out for a month, And I thought, oh, all right, fine. He calls me up about 4 weeks later. He says, get over here. We need to talk. I thought, well, that's it. It's over with. And I get in there. I go into the meeting. The parking lot's all dug up. I'm late to the meeting. I walk in 5, maybe 10 minutes late, and he's talking to the other columnists, and he stops. And he looks over at me coming in the door, points at me, and says, there's our rock star.
Wow.
And I'm going, what are you talking about? She says, you've been on 4 weeks and you're pulling more page views than all the columnists combined.
Guess there's an interest in it.
Yeah, gee whiz, keep going. 6 months later, the digital editor, who was my report to, said, you got a national audience. And at the Christmas party, the publisher and the editor stood up and said, hey, she's got an international audience. We were on a little dinky weekly paper in upstate New York, but the internet did its magic.
Yes, as it does at times. I do have to ask you the obvious question. Since you were in the military and working at Lockheed Martin, did you ever encounter anything that you can discuss having to do with UFOs?
Well, I had my own share of sightings during the 32 years of work for Lockheed Martin, but it wasn't anything I reported and that type of thing. But when I was in the Air Force, Christmas Eve, 1971, I was in Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam. And a friend of mine and I were going to go down to the base chapel to go to midnight mass, sort of a tradition thing, We were walking along, gazillion stars in the sky. We didn't have a lot of light pollution where we were. We were out on a peninsula. And all of a sudden we saw this thing streaking across the sky. And then it stops. And my friend looks at it and says, I thought that was a jet. And I said, so did I. He says, jets don't stop like that. And I said, and helicopters don't fly that fast. And then I said, if that's what I think it is, remember, I'd done a lot of reading in high school. I was only 18, 19 in the Air Force. I said, I bet that thing's going to dance around like a fairy. Darn if it started doing this thing and then poof, gone,
Wow.
Neither one of us had our minds on midnight mass,
Oh, I guess not. So what made you decide to write the book?
Okay, we'd been doing the column. I'd been writing the column for since 2013, a weekly column. And of course, it sounds fun, but it's a weekly grind. You got to turn out 500 words every week. Anybody who's ever written a term paper understands that sometimes no ideas come. And I had been doing stuff. And one of the things I had been doing since New York State was my beat, the name of the column was New York Skies. And I started adding up. I'd go out to MUFON or I'd go out to New Forks database and I would I would go in there and add up certain things around certain cities, or maybe the prominent cities in a certain county or something like this. And I discovered two things. One, MUFON had county data, but it was very badly put in because it required the person making this sighting to put it in, and 17% of the people who put in a report at MUFON didn't spell the name of their city right. Okay. And 3.5% didn't even put anything like that in. Sometimes they would say, they put a little line like, my mother told me not to tell you. My husband told me not to tell you. The sheriff told us not to tell you, that kind of thing. But most of the time it was just left blank. So that frustrated me. And then when I was over with the National UFO Reporting Center, I wrote the folks there and I said, hey, is there a way you guys can display the county data? And they said, one, we don't collect it. Two, put a pin in a map was their answer. And so sometime later, we decided to do New York State. And we did a systematic study of New York State. It took us about 6 months to do. And we were giving little bits of it as we went along in weekly columns. And we showed some old timers, guys that used to be like former MUFON directors here in New York State. We showed them some of the data we had. And they were saying, wait a minute, we didn't know there was a cluster there. We didn't know there was a cluster there either. Things like this was coming out of their mouths. So in October 2015, Linda and I were in our favorite pub staring across a couple of pints and said, look at all the weird stuff we found, And in the course of the conversation, oops.
We just lost your sound.
There we go. Sorry.
There we go.
And we decided, we thought, what would happen if we did the whole country? Okay. And of course, remember, it took us 6 months to do New York, and we said, yeah, let's try that. So we did. And we started officially. We had some preparatory work, things we learned not to do and things we learned to do when we were doing New York State. So I'll give you an example. Things that took us 2 months to do back then, I do in a day and a half now. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
We're both ex-government contractors. And the first rule of government contracting, do as little work as possible. So the idea is, if you learn how to do something, document the hell out of it. And then you've got a process procedure and you work smarter next time. Okay. So we wrote process procedure for this, for ourselves. And and sanitizing NUFORC data was vastly different than sanitizing MUFON data. Two totally different animals, two database sets that weren't compatible. So
Yes.
once we sanitized it, we had to go ahead and then make them compatible. And once we did, we could do something with the data. And it took us, we thought it would take us a year. It took us 18 months to do the 2017 book. Now, I'll show you where things were. We had in those days 21,000 records in the database. We kept adding things every year. By 2020, just about the time we were getting locked down, I had about 148,000 in the database. And we thought we were going to, the lockdown, we're going to be under house arrest for a year with the pandemic. So we figured maybe we'd start working on the new book. And we couldn't. Because one of the things we said we wanted to do is we wanted resolution right down to the city. And while we had city data, 17% of the people don't spell the name of their city right. Now, you put that against 17% against 160,000 sightings, that gets very big. So last August, I was like going back to work at Lockheed. I sat down every day for 6.5 to 7 hours, and I went through the database with a golden email list, fixed the names of the cities, added county data if it was wrong, added zip code data, added latitude and longitude data. So the database really got enhanced by doing this process. And it took 650 hours. We finished the first week of January, and the second week of January, we started the 750, 800-hour effort to produce the Pink Book.
It's just a monumental effort that you have gone to do this. But I will tell you this, I have already used the information in your book, and I've only had it a few days, and it is going to be extremely valuable going forward. And as an investigator, you mentioned this earlier, but I can tell you you're correct. You are correct in that we don't know what's going on without the data.
Yeah.
We might assume something because we get involved in a certain area. Say for me, it's Missouri. You know, I do a little bit around surrounding states, but I really don't know what's going on across the country. And to find out exactly what is happening, it makes our job so much easier.
Something we figured out too, in the UFO community, and we realized this during the first 4 years I was writing the column. Everything was focused on case study, field investigation, and that's okay. I mean, I am all for CSI style field study, okay, but it was blinders. Every single case was a one of a kind, and our attitude was, has anybody bothered to measure the phenomena itself, the greater body of it? Instead of looking at one ant, let's look at the anthill. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's what we did essentially. And this is where the patterns came in. This is where we've got, if you noticed in the book, we've got yearly, monthly, and hourly numbers for every single state. We've got yearly, monthly, and hourly sighting charts for every single shape. This is something only the Pink Book has. And the thing we found fascinating was noticing, in fact, George Knapp was like shocked when I was talking to him one day on a Zoom call. I said, the shapes, we found something interesting about the shapes. And he says, what's that? I said, some of them have seasons. He said, what? Seasons? And I said, yeah, some of them only show up in the spring, some only show up in the winter, some only show up in the summer, some only show up in the fall, that kind of thing. And so we've learned a lot, but we don't know where they're from. We don't know how they got here. We don't know what they eat. We don't know how they power their ships, but we've learned a lot.
Right. I'm going to show something here that you sent to me. Could you explain what this is?
Okay. Well, first thing, if you look at, you look up at the top there, we did an average for every single state. Okay. The state's number for 20 years. And now this average by year, it's only an average. If they go up and down and all this kind of stuff. So it's an average per year, an average per month, and an average number of sightings per week, and then an average number of sightings per day. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's the principle. The next, then the chart is the actual measurements from 2001 to 2020. Now, one of the things happened when the first book came out, people said, why didn't you go back 20 or 40 years? So that this time we captured the data, and I made a special request to MUFON. All I wanted was magnitude. I didn't want shapes. I didn't want detail. I just wanted to know magnitude. So they gave me from 1960 to 2000. And then again, I had to do a lot of gyrations to get the data formatted to work with NUFORC. But basically, we found out that for that 40 years, it only represented about 13,150 sightings. Okay, people keep thinking 40 years ago was the golden age. Mm-hmm. We're seeing all of it now. Now, why? Look at the first 5-6 years of that yearly chart. Notice there's a level but increasing amount. Right. That is access to broadband in major cities and major cities suburbs. One of the drivers we discovered drivers. That population is driver. Most people knee jerk on that. But we discovered with the first book, temperate weather. Okay. The second thing we sort of had a sense of, but we were able to prove it with this new book, hours of darkness. Okay. And then we discovered that access to broadband was a major driver. That's why we see some of the Midwestern states and the rural areas have so few sighting reports, because they don't have easy access to the internet, which is how you report this stuff. Broadband has been to the UFO sighting community what the printing press was to our culture. A huge boom to the dissemination of information.
Sure. People that I've spoken to, witnesses, have said they didn't know where to report this. They had no clue that MUFON or National UFO Reporting Center existed, and they had to ask people, and then they would be led to me. And usually what they'll do is they'll call me first, and then I'll say, would you please file a report?
Yeah.
And how to do it. And if they can, a lot of them do have access to the internet now, but the rural areas don't seem to be as familiar with it as people living in the cities. So I can totally understand that. And I need to ask you this. Let me take this down for a minute. When I speak to witnesses from anywhere, they often tell me there were other people with them that don't want to be involved and don't want to file a report. Or they have heard of someone who saw something, or I'll meet someone who said, oh yeah, I saw this thing in 1978, but I'm not going to tell anybody about it. I'll tell you, but I'm not filing a report. How common do you think that is? And as far as percentages go, what do you think the percentage of people is that actually file a report that see something?
Okay. All right. This was a troublesome thing for me as a journalist. Okay. I asked early years, the column 2013, 2014, I asked people at conferences, investigators and prominent speakers, 1 in 10 is the golden rule.
Right.
And I said, well, wait a minute, 1 in 10. Okay. And as we started getting a database going, I said, well, that doesn't add up. So the next thing we did was I got people to qualify that. And they said, well, no, 1 in 10 people see one, and 1 in 10 people report them. And it still didn't feel good. Okay. So because if you go back against an adult population, it doesn't jive. Then in 2017, Fox Pictures did a poll, much like all the other polls that had been done up to that point. 36% are believe this stuff, 42 to 45% are on the fence, and 16, 17% think it's all baloney. Okay. But they asked an additional question. They asked several additional questions. And one of them was, have you seen a UFO? And the number they came back with was 16.74% of Americans say they'd seen something. I wasn't sure I liked the metric because that worked out to about 42 to 50 million people, adults. Okay. But I didn't have 42 million reports. I had 148,000. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, fine. 2019, September 2019, the Gallup poll comes out with a poll as well. September 2019. You can Google it. It's still out there. And they said this number around 16%. So now I've had 2 poll metrics to work with. So I started cranking it back a couple of different ways. At this point, I've got 148,000 reports. And, I want to correct myself. A little while ago, I said 600,000. I meant to say 167,000. You get a little nervous when you get on the radio.
I doubt it.
And so what happened was I cranked the numbers a couple different ways. And finally, we came up with a way of working the metric. And basically what we've come up with is approximately 1 in 253 people reports what they see. Adult people in the United States.
That would make more sense.
But there's a scary part, though. I have 167,632. Times that by 255. How many sightings do we have in the United States?
Yeah. A lot. a huge number. And okay. I tend to believe that.
We got to temper it. We have to temper it. People all the time come to me. If I put up a chart, I stopped doing this on Facebook. I every now and then I'd crank a really good chart and I'd put it up, and I'd always have half a dozen trolls come on there and say, "Oh no, it's all driven by population. Oh no, that can't be right." Okay. So one of the things we did, people were coming to me and saying, "Oh no, you can't. You've got to take out all the newts." This is the line they use: "Take out the nuts, kooks, and crackpots." And that's like that movie Amadeus Mozart. The emperor comes to him and said, "Perfect, beautiful symphony. Take out a few notes and it'll be perfect." And Mozart says, "Which notes would you like me to take out?" Well, I felt the same way. So I asked people in a couple radio shows, I said, "Do I take 30% out? Do I take, how much is a valid amount?" Okay. We came at a number for a chalk talk, 70% right off the top. Took 70% of the sightings say they're no good. We're going to keep 30%. And then you divide that number, it's 153,000 approximately. Divide it by 20 years, you get a number. Divide that by 12 months, you get a number. And what it works out to is, say you divide it by all 50 states, assuming for sake of argument, all 50 states are equal. They are not, but all 50 states against that number. And what it works out to is one exotic sighting a week for every single state every week for the last 20 years. That's still a huge number.
It is. Yes, it is. Do any states in particular stand out as having an unusually high number of sightings versus the other states?
Oh yeah. California is number one. Everybody knows that, but you can't just knee jerk on the population issue. Remember, I said there are other driving factors. Plus, we discovered influencers like proximity to bodies of water, proximity to toxic ecosystems. A friend of mine, Thomas W. Conwell, you should have him on. Proximity to toxic ecosystems, dead coal mines, dead strip mines, dead oil fields, dead gas fields, fracking fields, polluted rivers, polluted lakes. They seem really interested in that. And every experiencer you talk to says, "Hey, they told us to take care of our planet." Okay. Which is why I think we're getting disclosure now. I think ET's pushing it. I think we're at that ecological tipping point, and I think ET's putting their foot down and says, "If you don't tell everybody, we will." I think that's what's getting ready to happen.
Yeah.
But there was what did I say there a minute ago? I said, "Oh, bodies of water." We track this kind of thing around the Great Lakes and around the ocean parts of the United States, and it's in the book.
And the rivers?
We didn't count it on rivers, but you can track it in rivers. In New York State, you can track it up the Hudson, you can track it through the Finger Lakes, you can track it down through the St. Lawrence Seaway, and you can track it all around Long Island. So, it was like 45% of the sightings in the states were around these bodies of water. I haven't done that for the country, but New York was my beat, so it was important. But California was number one, Florida is number two, Texas is number three. Now, people come to me and say, "Wait a minute, Texas has more population than Florida." I said, "Yeah. And Florida has 3 times the coastline area than Texas does."
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The water factor.
Yeah, the water factor. Now, the next 7 of the top 10 states, Washington, New York, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois, they tend to play musical chairs year after year. I would do an update from the 2017 book. I'd add another year, and the top 3 stayed where they were, and the other ones kind of shifted around. A couple of years ago, New York State was number 6, then it was number 5, then it was number 4, and then back to number 6. The only consistency in there is Arizona has been consistent for the last 6 or 7 years at 7. At rank 7. Who knew? And Arizona is one of the, it's not the top state. It's this year it's number 7, but Maricopa County, the Phoenix area, is the number 2 county of 3,125 counties in the United States. They're the number 2 county for sightings in the country.
Wow.
Los Angeles County is number 1. It's got more sightings than 39 individual states. Maricopa County has more sightings than 35 individual states.
Well, of course, we're all wondering why, why that is.
Well, we think
do you have a handle on that?
Yeah, I do. They've got the temperate weather thing going. They're both very warm climates, for one. Okay, they got the population. Okay, now some people said to me, "Well, Los Angeles, that's all lights." I said, "Not the whole county. It's not." And if you do a little bit of history in Los Angeles, they've been reporting strange lights flying up and down the canyons out there since the 1880s. This is something modern people don't know about. It's over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So there's that. But we also discovered something. There's a famous song, and I don't remember who did it. It talks about going up above the city, going up into the hills above LA, above the city lights. Well, we think a lot more of the sightings happen with people who are up away from the general city area and up into the hills, and so they're above all the light pollution. We think that's part of it. There's also another thing, what we're calling the generational effect. They had the Battle of LA back in February of 1942.
Yes, they did.
So somebody heard grandpa and mom talking about that, and gee, maybe if I look up regularly, I'll see something cool. Same thing in Phoenix. 23 years ago, they had the Phoenix lights, and the same buzz goes on. And there's generational thing we call the generational effect. Maybe I'll see something if I look up regularly. And we think that has something to do with it.
Yeah, that would make sense that they're on the lookout for it.
Yeah.
They're skywatching, and skywatching is a great thing these days. I know a lot of people who've never seen a UFO, but they like to skywatch just in case. So they'll sit out at night, they'll look at the stars, they'll watch for shooting stars, and they'll just lay out and, have a conversation with someone and watch the sky.
You wouldn't believe how many newspaper articles I wrote where somebody said, we were laying on the hood of our car watching the sky. We were laying in the back of our truck watching the sky. We were on a blanket out in a football field watching the sky, So that helped drive the whole leisure time model.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We did a plot there. Somebody asked me around the time of the first book, they said, what about the John Keel thing about day of the week? Okay. And John Keel, back in the day, back in the 70s, had about 800 or 1,000 punch cards of sighting data. Okay. And he had somebody at one of the universities crank the thing, and they came up with Wednesday as the pertinent day. Okay. And it came to be known as the Wednesday effect. Okay. And my hat's off to John Keel, because he did essentially one of the first sort of statistical studies by somebody in the UFO research community. Okay. People ask me about that. So we wrote an algorithm to look at the data that way. And we found out that 76% of them happens to be Saturday is the day. Okay. And then we found out that Wednesday and Thursday but it was predominantly southern states. And his data was predominantly southern states. Okay. And a couple of Linda's interns looked at that and said, well, we're from down south. That's Bible study night.
That's what I was going to say.
Leisure.
They're out.
Leisure night. You're out. You're coming
on Wednesday night.
You've been looking at the good book for a couple of hours. You're coming out to the parking lot, getting in the car. Hey, honey, look at that. So, yeah. And then there was a couple of states where it was a different day, but the only day that does not peak is Monday. Monday Night Football. Who's going to go out and look at UFOs? So
there's so many factors to consider.
The variables
the weather,
are serious.
The part of the country, the something going on certain nights of the week. Yeah, there's a ton. The other part of this that I want to ask you about, what you just sent me with this briefing, the definition of observational science, and then statistical science. Can you explain that?
Okay. I actually sat down. I don't know if you know Dr. Bob McGuire.
No.
Okay. He's been on with Dave Scott a lot out of Vancouver. And Dr. Bob's retired from Virginia Tech, a very serious scientist. And he's a big fan of mine. Okay. And we got talking about it. And I says, besides statistical science, what am I doing here? kind of work am I doing? He says it's observational science. It's one of the most basic forms of science that you can do. So that impressed me. I said, okay, fine. These people are always saying, oh, you UFO people aren't scientific. Well, that's why we put those two definitions up there, because the people who report UFOs, in a way, it's an observational science. And those of us who step back and look at this massive information, that's a form of observational science. Okay. And then, of course, we're cranking numbers. Now, when the first book came out, and the New York Times did a story about it. If your audience wants to find that story, if they go on a web search, do the web search on NYT for New York Times, NYT space UFO space Costa, and they will get an April 24th, 2017 article by the New York Times. They did this. You got a title you can't beat. It's just, people are seeing UFOs everywhere, and this book proves it. Okay, and they're what impressed them was, up until our book came out, everything had been an anecdotal story account, somebody's sighting report, somebody's grand story about what they saw. Suddenly, somebody put hard, cold numbers in front of them. That blew their socks off.
Oh, yes, it should. It's it's an amazing feat what you did here, and I can also see that it's going to be an ongoing thing, I would imagine, and I would hope, so that people, that this can carry on.
Well, actually, yes and no. I turned 69 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have to retire sometime, right?
I'm technically retired. Okay, here's what we're doing. I am going to do with an organization that has a virtual conference space. I'm going to start doing a series in September, loosely titled Cheryl Does States and Shapes. And every week I'll do a presentation about one of 50 states. So we'll be doing at least 50 presentations, and we'll talk about the shapes. And then we hope to do 33 episodes just focusing on one shape at a time and going through the dynamics. There are some states that don't have certain shapes. There are some states that have shapes that have a dominant. I'll give you an example. Texas has an awful lot of triangles. In New York State, the triangles fly up and down the New York State Thruway. Who knew? But by the way, the New York State Thruway and the Erie Canal, which is parallel to, happens to be a ley line for your metaphysical audience. So there's a lot of goofiness going on here. But
I have to say I agree with you on the ley line business. I've studied that myself, and there's a connection. There's definitely a connection.
We had one thing where we had early on, when we had the data, I couldn't make sense of where certain locations were in New York State and why. Couldn't come up with anything. My editor said, look for gas pockets, look for fault lines, look for this, look for that. He said, go through it. I want to know what is the common denominator. And we couldn't find anything. Called up Ben Moss, who used to be the senior investigator for Virginia. I said, Ben, help. He says, can you find an ancient map of Indian territories in your state? And I said, yeah, pretty easily. Got a hold of historical sightings. They sent me over a PDF. I made an overhead viewfoil, laid it down on the map, and son of a gun, that's where the clusters are. Our modern clusters seem to be around Native American territories, and some of them not too populated, so, and the article that was just done in a South Dakota newspaper, the reporter said to me, he says, if I'm reading your chart, and he had a chart like the one you just showed up with Missouri, I had sent him that little 2-page chart. Okay. Mm-hmm. And he said, Minnehaha County, that's where all the sightings are. And he says, I said, that's where the bulk of them are. He says, that's the Indian reservation. Yeah. So they did a story about the same time the Kansas City people did one. In fact, I sent those Kansas City thing, the briefing, and didn't hear back from them. So,
oh, really? Well,
after I read that article, that was a brilliant article. Okay, I did send it to you.
Did you? Okay.
This morning I sent you a copy.
Okay. I will get on that. The as of late, we have had sightings of boxes just a three-dimensional 3D box. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that in your data.
The squares, yeah.
Yeah, the squares,
The
but
board,
they're,
the
you know,
board,
they're 3D.
I wish they'd call them the Borg cubes, you know. Yeah.
They look, yeah. What the heck is up with that?
Okay. This isn't new. 1883 in New York State, a cube-like thing parked itself over Niagara Falls for the better part of 3 hours. And then when it decided to move in the middle of the afternoon, it flew around, 19th century Buffalo, and then was gone. So they have been seen before.
Okay.
But if you notice in the book, they are rare. They are rare. The squares and rectangles, they're
it's
rare.
Just something that's come to my attention in the last couple of years. My daughter had a sighting of one. She looked out her window, and across the street in this vacant lot is this cube sitting there about 12 feet off the ground. And it was about 30 feet across. And then she said it dissipated and dissolved. It didn't shoot off or anything. It was just kind of dissipated. And that brings me to another question. Have there been very many sightings of these unidentified objects that don't go anywhere? They simply disappear.
The database doesn't show that. Okay.
Okay.
You'd have to go into the descriptions, and quite literally the first thing we get rid of when we pull the data in is we get rid of the descriptions. We keep what time, what day, what date, what year, what shape, and what state and city and state. That's all we keep.
Okay.
We're going for raw data. People have asked us, can you discern other stuff? And I said, people think there's a lot more information in these sighting reports than there are. You're lucky most of the time to get a full literate sentence. Every now and then you get somebody who's very articulate who will write you a paragraph. Sometimes they'll write you an essay. Okay. I used to base some of my news stories on some of these essays, so no, I don't have any information like that about it. Now, there is a column for duration of how long it was there, but it was so inconsistent and so often not even filled in. We never even bothered to keep it.
Okay. Did
you like how we ranked for Missouri? We ranked your top counties and your top cities.
Yeah, let me pull that back up again here. And I was also surprised to see that we ranked 14 out of 51.
Yeah,
because
you guys are in the top 20.
Yeah, because we're not an extremely well-populated state. But on the other hand, it doesn't surprise me because I've had to handle so many sighting reports. And I just feel like there's a lot more going on. Obviously, not as many people report as see UFOs.
Can I give you a clue?
Sure.
About Missouri? Don't you guys have the Meridian Fault there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have.
Remember I told you an influencer was
Yeah.
serious interest in fault lines, and the Meridian Fault's a serious fault.
Yeah,
back in the 19th century, it was a disaster.
So it would be if that thing occurred again, which it will, but they just don't know when. It's probably take out St. Louis and Memphis and Nashville. And this gets me to balls of light, because I have to ask you about this. We have a lot of balls of light. Some people call them earthquake lights around the fault lines. And we do notice that does happen right before an earthquake, that they'll happen. But we also
that's an EMF effect. Okay.
Yeah. We have some lights in Missouri that we call spook lights, especially the one around Joplin. And we have some others across, if we follow 37 degrees latitude, they're all across the state. And I'm wondering if there are any statistics about that, because they are unidentified objects, maybe not flying, but floating objects. Is there anything about that type of thing in your book?
Well, no, we didn't break that down like that. We did do a thing. In fact, okay, we're going to do, I guess I'm going to let the cat out of the bag on this. We're going to do 50 individual state books. This book here the pink book only went down. It gave you a state and all the county data. Okay.
Mhm.
We have resolution down to the municipal and location level. So we plan if we had printed it out in the main book for every state, it would have been 6,800 pages. That's 3 Oxford dictionaries deep. Okay. Can't do it.
No.
So we're going to produce, we're getting ready. We have a template for how to do it. And of course the data is there. So it's just a matter of cranking the reports and cranking the charts. We're going to generate 50 individual state books. Title's going to be something like UFOs over Missouri, UFOs over Ohio. It's going to be a consistent title. And we're going to put just information about that state. And one of the things that I could do is when we talk about the things like sometimes some people say fireballs are those spook lights. I've heard people talk about that. And we hope to do the shapes in that state and be able to show you where they are. And since we added latitude and longitude information, we can give it to you by latitude. And by the way, in the book, we also debunked 37th parallel being the UFO superhighway. It's not. 10 other latitudes had far more sightings than 37th. That doesn't mean they don't have some cool stuff going on, but they are not the superhighway. They are not an interstate for UFOs.
I agree with you that there are, because I deal with 3 of them in Missouri and also one in Arkansas, the lines of latitude do have something to do with paranormal activity and UFO sightings and all kinds of strange phenomena. That it's every one of the lines of latitude. It's not just one.
Well, some are more active than others. In fact, in 2016, when that book came out about the UFO superhighway, we were too deep into generating the white book, and we didn't have time to really look at it. But our gut instinct had been, we were familiar with the counties where these things were, where these latitudes were. And our gut instinct, it was going to be up around latitudes 40, 42, 41, around that area, more than it would down there. 37th latitude, as far as its huge numbers that it has, it really only picks up those numbers when it goes through a major city like Los Angeles. Okay. And that type of thing. You would think a UFO superhighway would have consistent amount of sightings or very high density of sightings across the United States. And we have latitudes that were like that. And we had the ability to literally say, show me everything on this latitude across the country. And we did. And of course we looked at it on 37th and it was spotty, and it really only showed up over major metropolitan areas and not across almost consistent across the country.
So which line of latitude is the busiest?
Off the top of my head, I'm going to say it's the of 42nd.
Okay.
I've got a reference book right here.
Oh, look at that. you have the pink reference, which I'm going to show here. Let me just pop that up real quick. That is what the book looks like. And here is the first book in white. Frequency, distribution, and shapes. And then while you're looking that up, Cheryl, I'm going to pop this one up. Here is the UFO beat, the New York Skies column. So if anybody wants to read that, they can get that.
You know, when people said to me when the white book came out, people who got it said, wow, it's got great information here, but this isn't the kind of book you crawl up in a chair with a cup of tea with. Okay, this is all hard numbers, right?
Right.
The UFO beat, on the other hand, is 238 articles that I wrote. That's the book you can curl up in a chair on a rainy night and read. There's some really good stuff there. It was a lot of fun putting it. I was always a freelance with the newspaper. I actually wasn't on their direct payroll. So I got freelance as my payroll way. So basically, I still owned the copyright to my article. So when the paper was getting ready to shut down, I asked the publisher, can I just go harvest all my stuff out of the server? And they said, sure. You know, so, okay. The one with the most, the 40th, number 40, they had 15,565. Followed by the 33rd, and the people with the 33rd are always talking about, 33-degree Masons, I bow to them. Yes, I think there might be something there, but the 40th parallel is where the bulk of the sightings are, with the 41st and the 39th on either side, almost dogging both the 40. So
Interesting.
show your show your audience. Show your audience that.
Out of everything that you studied to create this book and all the statistics, what is the one thing that stands out the most to you? We lost your sound again. Let me unmute. Says your mic isn't connected. So something got accidentally hit, I believe.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can now. Okay.
I'm not in my normal setup. I am in a cottage in the Thousand Islands.
Okay.
And I've been up here on a writer's retreat all week. Okay.
So that explains why we're having some technical.
I'm banging into the microphone, and every time I bang into it, it's not the right thing. Go ahead and ask your question. I'm sorry.
So out of everything that you had studied to create this book, what's the one thing that stands out to you as being extremely unusual or interesting?
I had done all the charts and graphs, and I had done the first draft of all the write-ups that we did. Okay, including the measuring the phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
Linda took a week of vacation, and I had gone over every day with a thumb drive over to Staples and printed off everything, and then brought it back home. So when she took the time off, we laid it out on the bed, we laid it out on the floor, and she looked at everything and she organized. She's the publisher, okay, and the senior writer. So she went ahead and organized how everything was presented. Both of us came to the conclusion that our analysis graphs of the individual shapes was the secret sauce. That's why we put that very prominently after the articles. The analysis, nobody has ever analyzed the shapes in terms of years, months, hours, that kind of thing. And we felt that was the secret sauce in this iteration of our research. And we may be able to do a little bit more with that as we come out with the individual shapes books and the individual states books. And then the two of us are going to walk off into the sunset.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a while before you retire.
At least a year.
Huge project.
Yes.
And we are getting close on time now. So I want to ask you if you've got any events coming up where you're going to be doing any presentations.
Okay, the most near-term one is in about a week or so. Yeah, next week I think it is Contact in the Desert. Now, because this one's virtual and it's going to be rather inexpensive to attend because you can get a virtual ticket to attend the things. All of us who were presenting did our presentations probably 2 months ago on a Zoom recording kind of thing, and put our slides up and that type of thing. And then I was just on a panel the other day with recorded. Okay, so we're doing everything this year in a virtual environment. Hopefully next year we'll be able to go do the Joshua Tree thing again. But so we're doing that. I'm supposed to be in Pine Bush in September. And we'll make sure that happens. And of course, I'm going to start doing this talking series on the observation deck. Probably in September, I'm going to start up giving the presentations. I'm trying to build the charts right now to give those state and shape presentations. So that we're being a busy beaver here.
Sounds like it. Absolutely. And where can people get your books?
Okay. The best place to get it is it's exclusive, actually. Go to Amazon.com. Go to books. And you can either look up Cheryl Costa, Cheryl with a C, Costa with a C, and you can go that route, or you can go to Amazon Books and go UFO Sightings Desk Reference. Now, 2 will come up. You'll get a white book with a 2001 to 2015, and there's the pink book. The one you want is the pink book. It's got all the answers the best answers we can give you right now. And you notice it's pink because a couple of women researchers put this thing together, and we dedicated it to Cora Lorenz, who was one of the first researchers to start gathering data back in the 40s and 50s.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the program this evening, Cheryl. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy person, and this is absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much.
Anytime, my dear. Anytime.
This is Margie Kay with UnX News. See you again next time.
You've been listening to the UnX News Podcast with Margie Kay. Any rebroadcast or duplication of this program or its content without express written permission from Margie Kay is strictly prohibited. The UnX News Podcast, in direct cooperation with the internet website margiekay.com.